Friends, welcome to Channel 24 YouTube. My name is Anastasiyeyu Norіциноюпоспілкувались, and Sергій Aslанян is with me today. Sergey, hello. Glad to welcome you.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
Before we start our conversation, I want to appeal to our viewers and listeners, so that you put your like, be sure to write a comment, you can also indicate your questions, we will definitely discuss them. And, of course, do not forget to indicate which city you are from. We are very interested in knowing where we are watched, where we are seen. And, of course, perhaps we have many different countries. And in this way we will expand our geography. Russia may end the war in Ukraine this year, on November 1st. This is stated in the document, which was actively circulating in Telegram channels yesterday. Now you see it on your screen. Most likely, this is a fake, but even if it is, why did it appear right now and why is the date of November 1st indicated?
There is a huge amount of unconfirmed information in Russia, and since we live in the era of the internet, ordinary people who sit on the sofas are the harshest critics. They always demand the so-called proofs, and the person believes that he is obliged to provide evidence. If I am sitting on the couch, I have read something and it has not been proven to me, I demand proof. And the most evidential is a document with a signature and seal. I, the bloody executioner of the Soviet people, Comrade Stalin, order the repressions of 1937 to begin and exterminate 8.6 million people. Since there is no such document, it means that there were no repressions. This is the primitivism of the logic of modern life, dictated by the desire of people not to delve into information, not to analyze it, not to comprehend it critically, but simply to demand, well, quickly and immediately, Maria Ivanovna, explain why 2 and 2 make 4. And, by the way, if I don't understand that 2 and 2 make 4, please prove it to me so that I still understand. And from morning to night, such documents appear, where absolutely absurd things are written, amazing decrees, frames, signatures, confessions. Moreover, we remember that we were accustomed to this clarity by the repressions of 1937, when people wrote about themselves. Tukhachevsky, for example, claimed that he really intended to arrange a war in order to force Russia to lose, and thereby organize a conspiracy. All this was signed and sealed. And this visibility, since people are as primitive as possible, is now the main source of both information and evidence. And finally, a document with a signature and seal appeared. The number of people who believed him is absolutely incredible. And only those who pretend to be analysts say, well, no, well, it can't be like that, primarily because the Soviet Union never leaves material traces of its crimes. If such traces suddenly exist somewhere, and are indirectly evidence of guilt, they are classified. Why are all the archives about the happy Soviet life classified forever? For the great patriotic war forever. The statute of limitations for storing documents is always extended. And then suddenly a piece of paper pops up, where something is written in black and white, because in Russia this never happens, at any time. But the war does tend to end. The way they spoke in different words, with different intonations and degrees of persuasiveness about the inevitable negotiations, testifies, one way or another, to a turn in this direction. Some time ago, there was not even talk of negotiations. Both sides made it clear in one way or another that they would have a war to the bitter end. And now both sides are explaining this without losing face, which is very important in politics. You can't seem like the first weakling to make a decision that leads to serious consequences. You must always resist to the last, even within the framework of common sense. Therefore, without losing face, both sides say that it is necessary to negotiate. Negotiations are needed. First of all, Putin needs negotiations, of course, because he has a stalemate, and it is completely unclear to him what to do. He runs out of everything, the economy, people, but stupidity does not end. Everything else is running out for Putin. And most importantly, whether he wants it or not, he is now forced to go for reforms. It is not by chance that he destroys his Ministry of Defense. He did not accidentally imprison another person because he is looking for a way out of the situation. And what if we check the Minister of Defense? The war is not won. And what if 5 generals were imprisoned? Again, it is not won. And what if you buy northern shells in Korea? Again, it is not won. And what if Hamas and Hezbollah were set against Israel? Again, it is not won. And what if the Wagner PMC in Mali goes on the attack, gets into an ambush? Again, it is not won. What they don't do, things don't go well. It doesn't work out in any way. Putin inevitably has a desire for a truce, not an end to the war. In no way does it imply that this will be the end of the war and the end of it. This is a gap, this is a pause. We need to accumulate resources, we still need to buy microchips from America, we need to finish producing the KH-101 and, in the end, see what is happening with the nuclear potential. And after Ukraine believes, the whole world will believe, and everyone will say again, well, look, Putin is great, he still started the war, but nevertheless ended it. Let's trade with him, let's continue human relations. After that, Russia will rearm and go to kill Ukraine to the end, because Putin will not stop. Only Putin's death can stop this war. But if, for example, a mandate is issued to destroy it, even within the framework of a separate structure or state, then there is a chance that this war will really end. There will be negotiations, which we are all waiting for, when both sides represent the interests of two different countries. And then the first persons, the second persons, the fifth persons directly, through mediation in the UN, on neutral territory in Kyiv or Moscow, will sign the end of the war. And today we have only a piece of paper. A dream is written on this piece of paper. By November 1st, it would be good to end the war. It will be ridiculous if by November 1st it is really possible to bring both sides to the negotiating table and stop at least the shooting. But this will be a coincidence, not the result of this piece of paper.
By the way, another date is indicated on this piece of paper, not November 1st, but February 1st, 2025, and they say that this is due to the withdrawal of troops. That is, allegedly the Russian Federation is ready to withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territories. But why exactly February 1st, if the completion of the so-called NWO is scheduled for November 1st? And is Russia ready to withdraw from the territories that are now temporarily occupied, including Crimea?
No way. But, for example, the occupation army of the Soviet Union withdrew from Austria only in 1955, 10 years after the end of the war, although there was absolutely nothing to do in Austria. By the way, since then, Austria has had a debt. And if we save, for example, the unfortunate residents of Austria from poor heating or a social package and establish the Russian world, then since 1955 the issue has not been resolved. Austria, get ready. Russia has long arms, a long memory and a big heart. He will hug him so much that no one in Austria will be left alive. Therefore, of course, to leave Ukraine under pressure, due to circumstances. In no case of their own free will. Unless Xi Jinping calls. They flew out of Kazakhstan like a champagne cork. One phone call and there are no CSTO troops there. But we see that no one is going to seriously put pressure on Putin. He is still shaking hands. Negotiations are still underway with him. And as before, America continues to supply him with all the military electronics from which those very missiles are made. Therefore, no matter what documents there are, no matter how the withdrawal of Russian troops, the end of the war, a truce or a ceasefire are formulated, if Russia puts its forged boot on its throat, it will not simply remove it. And Donbass for 10 years was a territory where there was neither peace nor war, but for some reason people are dying, and no one was going to leave there. Although the military situation in no way indicated that Russia had won anything there. She got involved, staged a massacre there, herself received a lot of blow and did not even move to leave there. The same is true for Crimea. Therefore, the exorcism of the devil is a separate ritual. Signing documents with the devil is just a certain date that is needed only for one thing, so that, God forbid, no one else is killed and so that it is also useful for a history textbook. After all the Soviet Union's wars are usually very prolonged. It's like a civil war. When did the civil war end in the USSR? What is the date? It never ended. And here the situation is the same, the world will be forced to sign, there will be a date, the troops will be taken out. This will be a very serious event, especially since Russia still considers Ukraine to be a zone of its interests as long as Putin is alive. It was our land, it remains ours both in the present and in the future. Therefore, we must be here either agents of influence or murderers, watchmen and gendarmes. Therefore, in no case, of course, not a single Russian soldier will leave these lands of his own free will.
Going back to November, could it be on purpose before the US election? Well, there was a statement by the President of Ukraine Zelensky that by the end of November Ukraine would develop an action plan to achieve peace. Detailed discussions will begin with the countries concerned on territorial integrity. What do you think about this? Could it be that this plan of Ukraine will be presented at the Second Peace Summit, where, let me remind you, representatives of the Russian Federation are expected? At least, this is what Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba said. The key word in the question is to have time.
What a terrible secret the damned bourgeois tortured out of the boy from Mikhail Willer. There is an answer to this terrible secret. The Red Army is always late. Russia is never able to meet any date for anything. Even if the date is set, for example, by November 1st, by the election of the American president or when the date of the end of the world becomes known, Russia will not have time. Well, because, force majeure crept up, they didn't give me a ride, this one stole it, something was missing, they didn't understand it, and in the end they didn't bring the telegram. Therefore, Russia, which is trying to do something by a certain deadline, is doomed to failure, it never has time. In this regard, Ukraine, of course, behaves more businesslike, but the peace summit is still a conversation not about what will actually happen, but about how we would like everything to look. A peaceful configuration, the ability to finally explain themselves clearly, to stop the bloodshed. But the peace summit is not the end of the war or a ceasefire, but one of the intermediate stages of politics, designed to eventually replace the dysfunctional and ragged UN. What the UN is now turning into, what it is a completely worthless and useless structure. It has no meaning and cannot solve a single issue. The Peace Summit is a kind of duplicate of the UN, and it, having received status and credentials from a huge number of countries, can be more effective. Why do we need 100 countries, 200 countries at the Peace Summit? Because this is the representation of planet Earth and the helpless UN. And these people, these states, these leaders of countries are already able to dictate policy in one way or another. Politics within the framework of planet Earth. One of the most terrible places on planet Earth is the war in Ukraine. And it is not able to stop it, much less NATO. Negotiations, to force Russia to sit down at the negotiating table, have not yet worked. And the Peace Summit, no matter what kind of paperwork it is accompanied by, is precisely an attempt to start negotiating with the world, with the globe, so that the war will end. But all the documents, intentions and even military operations that are now being declared have nothing to do with what will actually happen. No one will reveal their cards in advance.
We are now continuing to communicate with the world, including even with China. We saw the trip of Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba to China. He met with Wang Yi. And at a meeting with Blinken, Wang Yi said that China would promote the idea of peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow. They discussed, among other issues, Ukraine, and Wang Yi noted that China's position on the Ukrainian issue is frank and unwavering, and that it will continue to persistently persuade and promote peace talks. But how can China help with this? You have already said that, in principle, this is the only country that can somehow put pressure on Russia.
Before this visit of Kuleba, it was not clear who on planet Earth was the main manager for Russia. In principle, America is always the most important. It can start any war, it can end any war. America ended all 2 world wars. America finished the first and second. She intervened and dotted the I's. America is able to solve absolutely everything. But now America has lost or transferred power to China. And it turns out that it is China that is tasked with provoking Putin not so much to the peace process as to consider the inevitability of negotiations. Who was the main person whom Russia will listen to? Who can clench his teeth, bang his fist on a chair? America appears to have shirked that role. It was delegated to China. China before that, after all, it has not changed at all in its peace initiatives, for example. For the first time he published all the points of his declaration of peace, everyone read it and said what nonsense. China, without losing face, said, we insist on our peace plan. Everyone read it again and said, "Come on, what kind of peace plan is this? This is complete nonsense." Nothing has changed, China has not rewritten it. You know what a great peace plan. What happened? Nothing has changed, except for one thing. America has transferred the authority to decorate Putin to China. China has taken up this work. China has no proposals, none at all. China, in this case, she is like a teacher who did not enter her kindergarten group. There the children fought, and she even vaguely knows who and what their names are. It seems that this is Masha, this is like Dasha, this is like Vasenka, and then it is like Petenka. Why are they fighting? What for? What kind of relationship did they have before that? Are they seeing each other for the first time in their lives, or are they already fighting here as a group since the first day they were brought? But China is not aware at all. But they told him, well, make sure they don't fight. And China went to sort it out so that they would not fight. At the same time, he has an absolutely fake piece of paper that does not contain, by and large, not only the foundation of a serious world but even a clear configuration. And China believes that it has an impeccable position. You know, we have offered you such a thing that it is impossible not to refuse. Even if you had come empty-handed, you would have been listened to attentively from now after Kuliba's visit. Because the invitation to Kuliba by China means that China is invited to start solving this issue. Before the visit, it was unclear. China took a visor and said, yes, America. Because China, as the most important initiative unit here, received powers from America. Before that, China spoke with exactly the same thing, no one was interested in it and no one listened to it. And now they are listening to him. It became clear that Putin would listen to China. We don't know America. He is all the more fond of mocking presidents. Moreover, Putin is lagging behind in development, he never keeps up with the situation and has no idea what to do in the current configuration of elections in America. Such a president. Moreover, according to his intelligence data, neither one nor the other. Neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump. There will be a third. America is also talking about this, you know, while we are dealing with this president, finally deal with Ukraine. China to the leg. China clicked its heels and said, okay, the peace process begins. It really begins.
And if we talk about China, then we understand that it is beneficial for it that the current regime remains in the Kremlin. How will it be possible to bring both sides to the negotiating table, but also to get benefits for themselves?
China does not care at all who is sitting in Moscow. China is now portraying the boundaries of civilization in front of the whole world in the jacket that is put on it. China sees the world in a completely different way. China knows that it has been the most important for the last 5 centuries on planet Earth. Any country is a geopolitical obstacle for him. Land as a phenomenon is extremely important for China. It is no coincidence that China has expanded into Africa. It is no coincidence that China buys entire countries for itself, and it makes absolutely no difference who is sitting on the throne in this country. For each country, they have a specific, very clearly spelled out invasion strategy. In this case, economic, if necessary, then military. Well, no one knows if China has an army at all. Just in case, they are afraid, because 1 billion people one way or another. Even if they just come and just spit, any other country will drown. But for China, there is no concept of friends and enemies. For China, there is a concept of benefit. Moreover, the Chinese are arranged this way, they have such a cultural feature. They do not have a sense of shame in our understanding. This is what we are ashamed of. For the Chinese, it is a reason to smirk and say, you are a fool. China, in principle, has a completely different idea of conscience and morality. That is why it is impossible to seriously negotiate anything with China. And when, damn it, they say on their faces that the Chinese are our friends, then you are being deceived, because China means something completely different by the word friendship. And Putin is Putin to China today. Please, we will come to an agreement with any Putin for our own benefit and make him our vassal. Then there will be, figuratively speaking, some kind of Stalin. We will come to an agreement with Stalin. It does not matter who sits on the Russian throne, China has its own interests. Moreover, China has very clearly described its interests. By 2050, there is not much time left, literally a quarter of a century, to resolve the territorial issues of Russia that arose due to the incorrectly signed Nanjing and Beijing treaties. This refers to the middle of the last century, 1848 to 1850. The land is the Far East and not according to the Chinese rules. But then China was weak, so the Russian Empire signed a treaty that was disadvantageous for China. So, by 2050, that is, in 100 years, or in 200 years, from 1850 to 2050, the land will be returned. And China is friends with some Putin for this, maybe only for the sake of self-deception of this Putin, or for the sake of Stalin's self-deception, or for the sake of the self-deception of Nicholas II, no matter what it will be called, he will take the land. This land is Chinese. If you read the domestic Chinese press, especially the press of the border provinces, you can see interesting materials. This is the party press, which can be considered both the economic and business press, and the party press. The party press of China writes that in no case should an imbalance be achieved between the investment attractiveness of our provinces and adjacent territories on the other side of the border. Because if we become attractive for investment, then no one will want to leave our regions. We are beginning to have prosperity in China. And when there is an incentive for assimilation, occupation and penetration into Russian land, then we must make this process attractive for investment. Simply put, let's translate from cunning Chinese into ordinary Russian. Let's finally come, settle in Russia and start developing their lands, because no one else lives here except us. And when the moment comes, we will not need to take this land with bayonets, because we will already be here, and we are Chinese, and this land will be Chinese. This is what we are talking about inside China. And for this it does not matter at all what it is called, what it looks like and what height it is that sits there, somewhere in the Kremlin, and sometimes even comes to run to them, to tap his heels on the stone path, because no one put a carpet to his limousine last time, and Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin deigned to run at a short trot to Xi, who only deigned to turn in his direction. Therefore, if anything, we do not know very well about China, we underestimate it and do not quite understand how it will act. He will act very specifically only for the sake of his own interests. These interests now include good neighborly relations with America. America said to sort it out, China will sort it out. But be friends with Russia in no case. Russia is finished anyway, because China will come and take what is theirs. Now assimilation, then, if necessary, they will reinforce it with tanks.
Sergey, we have such serious conversations, but your interlocutor in the background is very touching, and our view is that the cat illustrates China's attitude to these conversations and how China treats Russia. Because he washed himself so beautifully. Putin's aide, Patrushev, former secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, also spoke about the negotiations. He said that the statements of Ukraine and the West about negotiations are a tactical trick. This is what Patrushev says. Well, we remember an article from the New York Times, where Russia calls the Pentagon and complains that Ukraine is allegedly preparing some very secret operations on Russian territory. So is this an advantage for Russia in the war, or what does he mean?
Of course, there are no advantages, but a respite is needed. This is what we started this conversation with. At all costs, Russia needs a respite in this war in order to finally rearm itself and finally attack Ukraine, seizing its entire territory and tearing it apart. And when there is a constant talk in these upper circles that we need a respite, we need a respite, we need a respite. After all, especially these people, they are very primitive. They speak what they heard. If they had a conversation about respite from morning to night, then this is exactly what they are talking about. Isn't the whole world plotting a treacherous respite? Well, listen, psychology is a very simple technique. This is how first graders usually communicate. This is when, Mum told me to tell you that Dad is not there, so come in. A child is very simple. These people are just as simple. They put dreams of a respite in the mouths of their opponents because this is the only thing they discuss within their government and the Security Council as the most important task for Russia, to get a respite.
And why? I remembered that they called Bєлоусов, the new Minister of Defense of Russia. Why do you think he has a conscience and even allows himself to call the collective West, with which they are allegedly at war, and ask to somehow influence Ukraine?
That is, America was the first to start calling Bєлоусов. Bєлоусов quietly crept into his office and suddenly found the marshal's shoulder straps in his desk. I was very glad that now, look, he is a real military marshal. And bam, the bell rings. He goes to the phone, and there is, "Do you speak English? How do you do?" The Secretary of Defense of the United States of America is calling. Stand at attention. This is what level you have reached if, look, a living American calls you. The man representing the number one country on planet Earth responded in the same way. Yes, I'll call right now. Yes, I'll call America right now. You know, I'm right now, to the White House. Well, okay, who do they have there? Someone is free. Yes, they don't sleep. An hour difference. Where is America? Let me look at your head. That's it, I'll decide. I'll call America right now. It's so cool, a geostrategist, a desk politician and the director of the One Phone Travel Department. What a personality. Look, America called him. And what about him? And he took it and called her in response. This is a human being. Well, let's go to lunch. It's all very simple, it's just very simple. There is nothing to say, there is no sense, but everyone around applauds. Look, ours, he deflated the wheels of the chairman of the collective farm himself. He also has the coolest moonshine, so now we are for Vasya.
Is the United States really so afraid of the Kremlin that at its request it then calls Ukraine and asks to cancel all plans and all covert operations?
No one calls Ukraine. And America is not a country that you can say, listen, come on, you clink. Tell in the public space, especially given the difference in translations. Foreign Minister Lavrov demonstratively always addresses his interlocutor on a first-name basis. In English, the addressed you is translated as you, since there is no addressed you in English. But everyone knows, ours, look, he is on you, and he is on you. This is the difference in translations. Politics is built around something that does not exist or that exists only illusory but should acquire maximum persuasiveness. And so that someone calls someone and after that there are some consequences, there are consequences after non-public calls. And the parties did not stop calling each other. And we called each other in the Cold War, in the Hot War, about the troops in Afghanistan, the attack on Syria. Everyone was always in touch, headquarters, intelligence, and administrations of top officials. America, when presidents resign, immediately creates a public library with documents for the period of their presidency. And the most interesting thing is the memoirs. And then they tell what they thought, why they made such decisions. While he was in office, he was responsible for the country, he had to be a strategist, a very serious person. Every word he said always had colossal consequences. When he was retired, usually a university professor, he would tell me what he was thinking when he sat at the negotiating table with the Russians. And many presidents, assessing the foreign policy of the Soviet Union, the general secretaries and the delegations that came, said in very polite phrases that they communicated with stupid people who have very strange and lively fantasies. They seriously thought that America was going to attack them. They need to talk to psychiatrists, but as a result, for some reason, they talk to me. Well, it so happened that I, apparently, am in the role of a psychiatrist. And American presidents, if you look at the list and carefully read their memoirs, have always treated Russian delegations, Russian initiatives and Russian foreign policy as a misunderstanding. Are you serious? Don't you really understand anything? Are you so primitive? You have such single-celled brains, and you call it a strategy? But we had a better opinion with you. They don't say that to your face. In the memoirs, this is described in great detail. By feelings, by understanding. That is, not that it is only a fact. This is also such a conversation. We sit with him, I look at him and understand that this Russian really believes in what he says. But this is absurd. In the normal world, we understand that this is a diagnosis. This is just a psychiatric diagnosis. And this has been happening throughout the existence of the Soviet Union. That's how it started in 2017, and it didn't end in 2024. And to say that America is afraid. It's good if America doesn't openly smirk sarcastically. It's good if she makes a serious face, but that's the maximum. What is really very funny is that you have to deal with such idiots.
A naval parade was held in St. Petersburg, which was personally received by the Russian ruler Putin. Many paid attention to the greeting of the sailors. Let's see it with you.
Hello, sailors. I congratulate you on your participation in the celebration of the Russian Navy. The crew of the ship, in response to the greeting of the President of the Russian Federation, performs the ceremonial movement, tinjay, symbolizing great respect for a person. The crew raises their right hand in front of the body and says the greeting, "Long live the Russian Navy." The command is repeated 3 times.
Some flashbacks. Do you have an understanding of what tinjay is all about?
I was in the Navy, in conscript service, and we didn't have Heil Hitler, even if it was called tinjay. Now in the country of fascism, it was necessary to find those who would legitimize the new version of the army salute. You know, someone has to be first. They've just come up with an idea, and they need someone to report to their superiors. They decided to persuade the sailors to this position and say, well, sailors, after all, in the name of Peter, the fleet, let's take off the masks. Well, hi Hitler already. Well, comrade president, hi Hitler already. And so 3 times. The Nazis had once, the Germans, the Russians 3. Called, however, in Chinese. I just wonder what they will demonstrate next, if it is already so open. Well, further down the list there are many different cultural nuances and contacts with the outside world. Well, harakiri, for example, is no less beautiful. Well, this is when the war is lost. And now this paraphernalia of fascism. After all, the Soviet Union did not cultivate German fascism in vain. It was not in vain that it sang common songs, and tried to march in the same way. True, the Germans sailed better than the Russian army. Well, now we need to finally get to the bottom of this historical layer, fall in love with it and present it. By the way, in the same paraphernalia, in addition to Heil Hitler, there are SA, SD and SS, almost analogues exist in Russia. Then torchlight processions, and, as according to the program, burning at the stake will begin, first books, and then they will move on to people.
If we still recall the parade that took place, then they did not show the ships that Ukraine attacked during the broadcast of the main naval parade in honor of the Navy. Only 2 ships of the Black Sea Fleet were shown. They were the corvette, Mercury, but also the frigate, Admiral Grigorievich. The media write that there were no ships that were allegedly attacked by Ukraine, but there was evidence that they either received some minor damage or information that some of them went to the bottom. Why didn't Putin remember this, and why didn't they present the fact that Ukraine allegedly did not sink anything from in there?
This game is very difficult to play, because on the one hand, everything is for the front, everything is for victory, get up, the country is huge, and on the other hand, nothing happens, peaceful life, we go to Crimea to rest. To combine this, especially for Putin, is completely beyond his power. It turns out to be too eclectic. Either you have a war and everything to the last, or you have a peaceful life and something just quietly sticks together somewhere. It is necessary to somehow demonstrate their own defeated equipment and focus on the fact that the entire Black Sea Fleet was sunk. On the fact that Ukraine, which does not have serious naval forces, won the war in the fleet, and the Black Sea Fleet, driven under the bench, now, if it exists, is more likely to be submerged than surfaced. It's not for a holiday. Moreover, Putin, who could not even remember what exactly they celebrate, and therefore congratulated the fleet on the fleet, and not on the day of the Navy, will not draw any analogies. If he sees him, he will be frightened, like an elderly person, in principle, like a small one. It is easy and simple to intimidate him. His psychiatric diagnoses, of course, have been rewritten and known in advance. It is clear what pills to use to stop them. But it is better not to put him at a dead end once again. For Putin, everything is a dead end. And here is a parade, here at last in all white, beautiful, hurrah, Heil Hitler. For Putin, a German-speaking president, a former president, now a dictator, this is an absolutely understandable style and logic. And suddenly there is something unpresentable here, some combat general without an arm, a knocked-out tank or, God forbid, a warship raised from the bottom of the sea, which was established by the Russian world there in Ukraine. This does not happen at parades. There are congratulations at parades. Then the soldiers are given, the sailors are given 2 hard-boiled eggs, a piece of butter, a piece of bread. This, in fact, is the main holiday. Everyone else goes to drink vodka. That's all. There is no place for shadows, halftones, only bright white light, only a parade and only the absolute inviolability of existence. There was such a parade last year, the year before last, the year before last, there was always such a parade, well, with a break on the 41st, 45th. Therefore, eternal Russia, everything is in order, the parades are on schedule.
The Institute for the Study of War writes that Russia used Navy Day to try to create an alliance against the West, attracting the participation of other countries such as Azerbaijan, Venezuela, Vietnam, Cuba, Myanmar, Syria and Qatar, which allegedly cooperate with Russia. In your opinion, what has Russia demonstrated with this event, and why should it now show its relations with a number of non-Western states?
Russia, it is great. Russia, it occupies the most important place on the globe. At the same time, no matter what international event takes place, there are no delegates from this globe. They don't go to Russia, they don't shake hands, they don't lie in their legs, they don't kiss. How can it be? And yet, Russia is a country that does not end anywhere. It has geopolitical interests everywhere, and allies everywhere, and friends everywhere. Previously, it happened that all sorts of military attaches and friends lined up to the horizon on the podium of the mausoleum, Africa, the Middle East, South America. This game continues, it is the same as the game of parade, there will be a parade, there will be international relations. Any configuration will do, friendly delegations, military joint exercises, a chamber of commerce, a common economic space. After all, for a Soviet person, the most important thing was abroad. All his life, the Soviet man groveled before abroad. For the Soviet people, the fetishization of the West was absolute. It is no coincidence that if an American calls, it is the most important person on earth. The presence of Americans is already happiness, it is already a holiday. You don't need a wedding general as much as you need a living American. But the French governess was also from the same series who taught noble children. Because foreigners are always the highest grade. Any Russian nobleman was considered the more noble, the more of his origin and the more foreign blood he had. If you were a nobleman from an absolute Russian, well, a so-so nobleman is second-rate. But if you, for example, are some kind of Learmont, then this is still the first grade. If it's some von Wiesen, it's definitely first-rate. Well, because it's abroad. And they groveled before abroad all their lives. And now there is no foreign country. A decent American, yes, was in Hershkowitz, and he was imprisoned. Find some normal Swede, but where will you find him? The French are extremely rare. The Germans, well, in general, are friends, but they don't come either.
Sergey, thank you very much for an interesting conversation and for finding time for our broadcast. I wish you a good day and remind you that Sергій Aslанян was in touch with us. Friends, support our stream with your likes and write comments, not forgetting to indicate which city and country you are from. We are very interested to know this. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channels to get a lot of interesting information. Thank you all for your attention, good news and see you.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.